This seems seriously weird with you sitting at the end of the table. You should have been here.
I don't envy you.
If that earthquake had happened 5 weeks later, Jim.
Yeah, well, my wife is very pleased.
I know. Too pleased.
Madam Mayor and councillors, I've provided a background paper, which I'm not going to address the issues in that. I'm speaking to it, but I'm happy to answer questions, but I'd like to take my 10 minutes and answer those, if there's not time, by email or phone. It would be disingenuous to suggest that I can do justice in 10 minutes to the financial issues facing the City Council, in particular the sale of partial sale of assets, in order to close the gap between available council funding and its projected financial commitments. I'm therefore requesting that if the time's not available, as I said, I'll receive and answer questions by phone or email, and my contact numbers have been given. I must say I've always thought that if selling assets was the answer, it must have been a stupid question. I watched 2 successive governments sell $19 billion of New Zealand assets and end up with more debt than they started with. If people who believe in selling assets to reduce their debt or mortgage had the courage of their convictions, they would sell the most valuable asset they have, their house, and rent one instead. Don Brash actually did that before he took up governorship of the Reserve Bank when he went to Wellington, because he thought mortgages were too high in interest. After a couple of years, he changed his mind and said he'd made a mistake because of high rental costs, but you didn't need a PhD in economics to figure that out. Most of us have figured that out without a PhD in economics. Grant Cameron, former Treasury official, now one of Council's consultant advisors on these matters, advised New Zealand Post and the government against establishing the Kiwi Bank, saying it was a bad idea with these words, quote, "We believe that there are major uncertainties relating to the bank's ability to secure the size and quality of customer base assumed in the base case, given the value proposition, that is fees, interest rates and service combination planned to be offered to the customers. We simply do not regard the value proposition as sufficiently compelling to produce the projected customer results," all of which of course was complete rubbish. History will show that in return for the initial capital contribution of $80 million from the government, which actually was paid out of New Zealand Post-owned dividends, the publicly owned Kiwi Bank is now valued at between $1.3 and $1.5 billion, and this year made a profit of $100 million compared to $7 million for New Zealand Post. An average increase in asset value of $108 million per year since the bank opened 13 years ago. Shouldn't we be asking some serious questions about the advice Council is receiving on its assets sales proposals today from such sources? The Council faces large social, infrastructure and financial challenges. No one could deny that. But it must take a long and not a short-term view for the future of the city. Christchurch has taken over 160 to 70 years to build. Large sections of it were destroyed in 2 minutes by the largest civil disaster in New Zealand's history. We should not believe that everything that needs to be done can be done as fast as we all might like. The cities of Europe took time, patience and vision and money to rebuild after the First and Second World Wars, but rebuilt they were, most magnificently so. But they took time. Once assets are sold, they are hard, if not impossible, to get back. The dividends they return are not lost for 5 or 10 years, but in most cases, forever. For example, Orion has returned $1.1 billion of dividends and capital returns to this council and other council owners since 1999, an average of $65.5 million per year, not to mention the increased capital value of the strategic asset. I haven't found any analysis in the long-term plan on this effect of the council and in any of the council documents. Liability, one of the important matters that does not appear in any of the documents I've seen is the liability that these partly privatised council assets will have to their minority shareholders if the company is required to work in the public interest during emergencies such as the earthquake. Private minority shareholders do not have to take account of social need or over financial return, and this can restrict the ability of councils to require the enterprises they own to help meet social needs in a time of crisis, such as a natural disaster. The government found this out with Air New Zealand, actually. In this regard, it is instructive to read the recommendations on page 12 of the Cameron report to the Council. If it doesn't send a chill up councillor's spine, it should. Quote, our recommended organisational architecture, don't they have lovely words for this stuff, has the following advantages. Their description. 1. Separation between political and commercial decision making. That sounds fine. Go and talk to the Auckland City Councils about what happens to the Port of Auckland and the harbour developments that they weren't even told about. 2. Flexibilities to invest and partner unencumbered by public sector constraints. Unencumbered by public sector constraints. That is, no power for elected representatives to intervene. Haven't we lost enough of our democratic framework in Canterbury already without the Christchurch City Council proceeding down this anti-democratic and dead-end path? Shortening the time frame for the works program will put too much stress on this generation of ratepayers. Not people like you and me, but those with low wages, particularly with young families, beneficiaries and the elderly, those on fixed low incomes. Christchurch is a low-income city. Look at the demographics and the deciles and you'll see it. And it is neither reasonable nor even necessary to move in this direction. Urgent work, specific flood protection, roading, sewage systems and other essential infrastructure should be rigorously prioritised, and what can be done within the Council's means should be done. But other good-to-have projects should be put on the slow or back burner. For example, the new stadium and the convention centre, and government requested and called into negotiations to work this through. People understand the need to be prudent and sensible as long as they are told the truth. This is a multi-generational cost issue, not just for the current generation to bear. It's an impossible burden to fix everything in a short space of time and the costs being carried by the existing generation. Discussions should be held with all major political parties about the challenges facing Christchurch, which are real enough, I accept that, and a revised financial plan over a longer time frame considered, including low or no interest loans underwritten by the government to avoid current local government constraints. This is not a business as usual situation we face in Christchurch. Dedicated bonds, which was the way in which most New Zealand's infrastructure was funded in the first place, should be considered. Central and local governments are amongst the few institutions in New Zealand which can and should take the long view. In conclusion, Madam Mayor, selling the assets of Christchurch reduces the ability of the city to make future decisions about what sort of city Christchurch wants to be. It reduces the long-term economic capability of the city, and it transfers wealth from the people of Christchurch generally, who already have lost enough, to the buyers of assets. Ask the proposers to buy assets, to buy the parks and reserves and make them free available to the citizens. Ask them to buy the art galleries and the libraries and open them up free and pay for that. You won't get too many takers. You'll only get people buying the assets that they want to buy because they're profitable. And if they think they're profitable, why shouldn't they be profitable for you too? Instead of selling assets, the city can delay certain activities and fund them through debt. It's not an ideal situation, but it's pragmatic and it's the most sensible in my view. And the dedicated bonds I've mentioned, which is the way most of our infrastructure was built in the first place. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Jamie.
No, we're tight on time, so I'll just keep to one question. I had a couple there. Thank you, Jim. Nice to see you, and thank you for the deputation of the submission. Given that we do have a short-term cash flow problem, what would your view be then on, say, an operating lease of a company, particularly like the highly regulated ones like an Orion or a Port? We wouldn't necessarily lose ownership, but
well, you don't lose ownership, but you lose a certain amount of control. It would be just absurd to suggest that you're going to have someone owning 40+% of a business and not have a say. Of course they'll have a say, and that say might not always agree with you or your owners. Now, you can replace the board, but you've got this fiduciary liability to those minority shareholders, and you can't just do whatever you want, which you can do if you own it, basically. They are separated from council in operational terms, I understand that, but the council appoints the board, and they can act, generally speaking, in line with the owner's wishes. Once you get a minority shareholding, and the larger it is, the worse it gets, you lose that. So, and the second thing is, the people who buy it then share the capital increase in value. If you look at the capital increase in value of Orion and all the rest of it, if you had a private shareholder, they would be getting half of their capital increase. Why should we hand that over to private owners who want to buy it for that purpose? That's what they want it for. They don't want to buy it because they're all you know, warm and fuzzy and cuddly towards the city of Christchurch.
Thank you very much. I do apologise that it's only 10 minutes, but if it's any comfort to you, when I turned up to submit on the annual plan, I was told that I had 5 minutes because I was just an individual. So at least things have improved.
We must all be treated as equals, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
So thank you very much.